A young native woman sat at the townside, her back straight, her silence calm. She was perhaps 27, with dark hair braided and tied by a worn strip of cloth. Before her lay a wooden crate filled with plain vegetables, carrots, beans, a few onions cleaned by her sleeve. She had washed them in the stream at first light, her fingers cold and sore, saying to herself in her people's talk, a tongue the town had long forgotten how to hear. The world around her began to wake up. Doors creaked open, hooves clicked, boots struck dust. She sat still as the people walked past. A woman in a nice blue dress crossed the street to miss her, holding her child's hand. Two young men, spurs jiggling, laughed low when they saw her waiting there. Their laughter was not cruel in noise, but in point, the kind that showed her she was wrongly placed, allowed only at the edge of their ease. Still, she smiled gently, a soft thing that held more grace than the town should get. She had learned to live on almost zero, the earth's favor, the creek's beat, the swapping of her hands. Her small garden by the river was all she possessed. In spring she planted seeds with the same care one gives to hopes, and now she sold what they gave, hoping to buy enough salt and flour to last the coming cold. But no one stopped. They passed as if she were part of the street itself, another thing to move around. By mid-morning the sun hung bright above the roofs. Her skin glowed brown beneath it, and her shawl, once red, had faded to the color of rust. A seller walked from his stall carrying a crate, too fast to see her. His boot hit her basket, dropping carrots across the dirt. He spoke low, something about watching where she sat, and left. She bent to pick them up, her hands shaking, not from anger, but from the small shame that came when no one cared enough to see. That was when a horse's shadow fell over her. She looked up. A rider sat astride a brown horse, dust-covered, the edge of his hat hiding his eyes. He seemed younger than most ranch owners, 30 maybe, his face tanned and hard to read. The townsfolk knew him as Ethan Royce, a quiet man who worked alone out by the plains, spoke little and kept his whiskey to himself. He got off the horse without a word, bent down beside her and began helping her gather the fallen carrots. His hands were rough, his movements careful. The people nearby slowed to look. A woman whispered to her husband, eyes closing a bit, as if kindness itself were bad. The native woman watched him unsurely. When he handed her the last carrot, their hands touched lightly. He asked low and firmly, "What amount for the basket?" His voice carried a quiet warmth, not sorrow, but respect. She paused, unsure whether to answer. He took a silver coin from his pocket, a whole day's pay, maybe more, and placed it in her palm. Then he lifted the crate, tied it to his saddle, and said softly, "You should not be selling here by yourself." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've always been by myself." She looked at the coin, heavy and shiny, and for the first time in months her throat ached with something close to thankfulness. Around her, the townspeople pretended not to have noticed. That evening she walked home along the stream, the wind tugging at her shawl. The light turned copper as it went down. In her small hut of wood and clay, she boiled what was left of her vegetables, saving one carrot to plant again. The silver coin lay beside her bowl, catching the firelight. She touched it many times, as though it were proof that not everyone had forgotten goodness. Her dreams that night were gentle but mixed, of hands that did not hit, of eyes that did not look past her. She woke before dawn, listening to the river singing beyond her door, and decided she would go back to the town again. Something within her, a weak, strong hope, pushed her to sit once more beside that road, no matter how many eyes turned away. By morning, the town stirred again, smoke rose from the tops of houses. She carried her crate, her shawl wrapped tightly, and took her usual place, but her gaze drifted often to the far-off line, as though waiting for something. She arranged her vegetables well, brushed the dust from their skins, and waited. The sun climbed higher. The people began to walk around. A cart passed. Children yelled. The same seller walked by. But this time, when the sound of hooves came close, her hands stopped moving. Across the road, a person rode into view, the same rider, the same horse, slow and steady. The townsfolk watched as he got off the horse again and walked toward her stall. The air seemed to hold its breath. He stopped before her, hat in hand, and said softly, "You should not be selling here by yourself." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've always been by myself." He noticed her look, and to ease her worry, spoke first to the land, how it used to grow flowers, how the rains had stopped 2 summers ago. She listened still, hands together, before offering that she knew how to make the soil come to life again. He smiled a little, as if half trusting her, and told her she could try come morning. The rain kept on. Through its quiet, they shared a strange peace. 2 lives once divided by judgment, now held close by a storm. When dawn came, the world smelled of new starts. She worked the fields without shoes, her skirt rubbing against the damp earth. He watched from a porch, surprised by the exactness in her movements, the way she tested the soil between her fingers, pressed the seed as if putting to bed a child. She sang sometimes, soft words in her mother's language, and he swore the air grew nicer for it. Within days, the ground began to turn dark with life. Sprouts rose slowly, as if unsure whether the world would let them stay. He built her a small hut near the creek, where willows hung their fingers through the water. She cared for his crops, fixed fences, cooked in the evenings. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Their silences carried more truth than any words could. And as spring showed its color, the ranch began to change. Birds returned, the soil shone with life. Ethan found himself watching her more often, not with want, but with the deep respect of a man who'd found the missing beat of his life. Yet the town hadn't forgotten its meanness. Whispers followed them whenever they rode in together, mocking dressed as humor, bad feelings sharpened like knives. One afternoon, when she brought herbs and vegetables to sell, that same seller who once spilled her basket scoffed, called her a trespasser, and kicked her crate into the mud. The street went quiet. She froze, shame burning through her. Before she could speak, a familiar shadow crossed the road. Rain began to fall again, thin and cold. He stepped through it calmly, eyes fixed on the seller. He knelt, lifted the scattered vegetables, and said softly, "Pick them up. Say sorry." The seller laughed, a sound meant to harm. Ethan didn't move. He took another step forward, his jaw tight, the kind of stillness that warned of danger. The laughter stopped. The seller's hand shook as he bent down, muttering an apology. The townsfolk watched from porches, embarrassed into silence. The woman's heart pounded. No one had ever stood between her and bad treatment. Ethan turned to her, his face hard to read under the dripping brim of his hat, and offered his hand. She paused only a moment before taking it. His grip was warm, strong. Without another word, they left the town behind, the rain washing the dust from their boots. Back at the ranch, they sat by the fire. Her shawl let out steam as it dried, and she stared into the flames, unable to speak for the rush of feelings scratching at her chest. Thanks, surprise, fear of hope. He told her quietly that he'd lost his family years ago, that silence had been his only friend until she came. She met his eyes, the fire reflected in them, and placed a small piece of sage in his palm. "For getting better," she whispered. That night, neither slept well. The rain beat on the roof, steady and never-ending, like the thump of something newly alive. In the dark, he listened to her breathing from across the room, soft as a sleep song. And though neither of them spoke, they both felt it, the change, the weak bond of 2 lives slowly coming together. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with the smell of wet soil and pine. The garden sparkled beneath the dawn, green and living. She stepped barefoot into the mud, tears in her eyes, as Ethan joined her. For a moment, they simply stood there, watching the water run through the lines they had made together. It was no longer just his land, it was theirs. And as sunlight broke through the clouds, touching her face like a blessing, Ethan realized the truth. Kindness had not only saved her, it had saved him too. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it gives you something to think about. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and please tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it for you on this Christmas day? I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a safe, Happy New Year. See you in the next story.